Sometimes, the most ordinary name on a piece of paper carries the heaviest story no one is prepared to hear. The rain had stopped only minutes before Daniel Brooks stepped onto the polished sidewalk outside Whitmore Industries. The towering glass headquarters reflected a pale morning sky, while employees in tailored suits hurried through the revolving doors with coffee cups and confident smiles. Daniel paused for a brief moment, adjusting the worn strap of the small backpack hanging over his shoulder. Beside him stood his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, holding his hand with quiet trust. She looked up at the enormous building, her bright blue eyes filled with curiosity instead of fear. "Dad?" she whispered softly. "This place is even bigger than I imagined." Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that appeared only to reassure someone else. "Big buildings are still filled with ordinary people," he answered gently. "Remember that." Lily nodded, believing every word he said. Inside his neatly folded document folder rested a simple application for the position of janitor. There were no impressive certificates attached, no glowing recommendations from famous executives, no mention of extraordinary achievements. Just a clean employment history, a home address, and one name written carefully across the top of the page: Daniel Brooks. To everyone else, it was just another application among hundreds received every month. To Daniel, it represented something much greater. It was another chance to provide stability for the only person who mattered in his life. The receptionist welcomed them with a professional smile before handing Daniel a visitor badge. Several applicants filled the waiting area, dressed in crisp shirts and polished shoes. Some quietly reviewed resumes. Others rehearsed interview answers beneath their breath. Daniel simply sat beside Lily, who opened a small library book and began reading while waiting. He never seemed nervous. Years of life had taught him that worrying could never change tomorrow. Across the spacious lobby, two employees glanced toward him before exchanging quiet remarks. One noticed the faded jacket he wore despite the elegant surroundings. Another assumed he had entered the wrong building. Daniel heard neither judgment nor whisper. His attention remained on Lily as she smiled over a funny sentence in her book. Every few minutes, she showed him an illustration, and he responded with genuine interest, making the enormous corporate lobby feel almost as warm as their tiny apartment kitchen. Upstairs, the executive floor followed its usual rhythm. Meetings began on schedule. Financial reports moved from one office to another. Assistants organized presentations while department leaders prepared for another demanding day. Claire Whitmore, the Billionaire chief executive officer whose decisions influenced thousands of employees, had already completed 2 conference calls before 9 o'clock. Her calendar left almost no room for interruptions. Yet somewhere within the building, a routine administrative process quietly unfolded. Human Resources gathered applications for several maintenance positions before forwarding a final approval list through executive review, a procedure few executives ever noticed. Daniel's application rested near the top of that stack. He had no expectation of meeting the chief executive. He certainly did not expect anyone important to recognize his name. For him, this was simply another interview, another opportunity to earn an honest living. As he gently squeezed Lily's hand before standing when his name was finally called, neither father nor daughter realized that within the next few minutes, one ordinary application would quietly interrupt the course of an entire corporation, simply because someone upstairs would read 2 words that time had never managed to erase: Daniel Brooks. Daniel Brooks followed the Human Resources coordinator through a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs celebrating decades of Whitmore Industries' success. Every polished floor reflected the bright ceiling lights. Every office door carried a title that represented years of ambition, yet Daniel noticed none of it with envy. His attention remained on Lily, who waited patiently in the reception lounge with her book resting on her lap. Before disappearing around the corner, he bent slightly and smiled. "I will not be long." She returned a confident smile that carried far more faith in her father than she ever realized. "I know, Dad." The interview itself was surprisingly simple. The hiring manager reviewed Daniel's application, asked about his previous maintenance experience, and listened carefully as he explained that honest work had always mattered more to him than impressive job titles. His calm confidence stood in quiet contrast to the rehearsed enthusiasm displayed by many applicants earlier that morning. Every answer felt genuine because nothing had been memorized. When asked why he wanted to work as a janitor inside one of the country's largest corporations, Daniel simply replied, "A building only succeeds because every person inside does their part. Keeping a place clean is no less important than running the company from the top floor." The interviewer paused for a moment before nodding with quiet respect. Meanwhile, several floors above, Claire Whitmore was reviewing documents between executive meetings. Multi-million-dollar contracts waited for her signature. Investment proposals covered her desk. Her assistant entered carrying another stack of paperwork requiring routine executive approval. Most of it involved facility operations, annual maintenance budgets, and new support staff recommendations. Normally, Claire signed those pages without reading every detail. Time had become the one resource even a billionaire could never purchase enough of. She reached for the next folder while continuing a conversation with her chief financial officer. One signature, another page, another approval. Then her eyes stopped. The pen froze only a fraction of an inch above the paper. Her conversation ended in complete silence before anyone else noticed why. Printed clearly near the top of the application were two words she had not seen in almost 12 years. Daniel Brooks. She stared at the name once, then again, as though expecting it to disappear. Every sound inside the office seemed to fade into the distance. The financial officer slowly lowered his presentation folder. Her assistant looked up in confusion after noticing the unusual silence. Claire's normally composed expression had completely changed. Her breathing became noticeably slower while an old memory, buried beneath years of success and responsibility, surfaced without permission. "Where did this application come from?" she asked quietly. No one answered immediately because the question itself felt unusual. Her assistant quickly checked the accompanying paperwork. Human Resources received it this morning for the janitor opening. Claire continued looking at the page without blinking. "Is he still in the building?" The assistant hesitated. "According to the schedule, yes. He should still be completing his interview." Claire gently closed the folder but kept one hand resting on it, as though letting go might cause something important to vanish forever. Across the hallway, senior executives exchanged uncertain glances through the partially open office door. They had attended board meetings during financial crises, legal negotiations, and billion-dollar acquisitions, yet none of them had ever witnessed Claire Whitmore lose her composure over an ordinary employment application. Downstairs, completely unaware of the growing mystery above him, Daniel thanked the interviewer for the opportunity before returning to the lobby. Lily immediately stood and slipped her small hand into his. "How did it go?" she asked hopefully. Daniel smiled with the same quiet warmth he always carried. "I think it went well." At that exact moment, the executive elevator doors upstairs opened, and for the first time in years, Claire Whitmore abandoned her carefully planned schedule, determined to find the man whose name had suddenly brought an entire chapter of her past back to life. The first rumor spread before Daniel Brooks even reached the parking lot. Inside Whitmore Industries, whispers traveled faster than official announcements, and employees who had witnessed the chief executive officer unexpectedly leave an executive meeting could not stop asking the same question. What could possibly make Claire Whitmore abandon a room filled with board members? Some believed an important investor had arrived without notice. Others guessed there had been an emergency involving the company's international operations. No one imagined that the reason was a quiet man applying for a janitor position. Claire stepped out of the executive elevator with unusual determination, scanning the spacious lobby with eyes that searched every corner. The receptionist immediately stood. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore." Claire offered only a brief nod. "Where is the applicant named Daniel Brooks?" The receptionist looked surprised. "He just completed his interview a few minutes ago. I believe he is still outside with his daughter." Claire glanced toward the revolving doors, only to see them slowly closing behind two distant figures walking toward the parking area. Through the glass, she could make out a tall man carrying a worn document folder while a young girl happily skipped beside him. Before she could call out, they disappeared beyond the line of waiting vehicles. Claire remained standing for several silent seconds. Her assistant finally caught up, breathing slightly faster than usual. "Should I ask security to bring him back?" Claire answered without taking her eyes off the empty entrance. "No." Her voice remained calm, but something within it had changed. "Not yet." Upstairs, curiosity had already begun replacing productivity. Administrative assistants quietly exchanged theories while managers attempted to piece together fragments of conversations they had overheard. One employee insisted the applicant must be a former executive using a different career path. Another suggested he was secretly connected to the Whitmore family. Each theory became more imaginative than the last, yet none came close to the truth. Daniel, meanwhile, remained completely unaware of the growing mystery surrounding his name. As he drove his aging pickup truck through downtown traffic, Lily looked over from the passenger seat with hopeful eyes. "Do you think they will hire you?" she asked. Daniel smiled while keeping both hands on the steering wheel. "If they believe I can help, they will. And if they do not," she continued. He answered without disappointment. "Then another door will open. Life has a way of rewarding people who keep moving forward." Lily quietly nodded before returning to the small sketchbook resting on her knees. She began drawing the enormous company building from memory, carefully adding every window she could remember. Back at Whitmore Industries, Claire returned to her office carrying Daniel's application herself. She closed the door and read every line again, slower this time. There was nothing extraordinary about the document. His address described an ordinary neighborhood. His work history reflected years of honest labor. Even the references appeared modest. Yet one detail continued to pull at memories she had spent more than a decade trying to organize into the past. The name, Daniel Brooks. She opened a locked drawer in her desk and removed a faded leather notebook she had not touched in years. Between its aging pages rested several newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and one old photograph whose edges had begun to fade. Claire stared at the photograph for a long moment before gently placing Daniel's application beside it. The similarities were impossible to ignore, yet questions still outnumbered answers. She reached for the office telephone and pressed a single extension. "I need every archived company record connected to the year 2014, she said quietly. "And I want them delivered to my office before the end of today." As she slowly closed the notebook once more, she whispered words no one else was there to hear. "If this is really the same Daniel Brooks, then everything I believed about that day may have been incomplete." Claire Whitmore had built her reputation on facts rather than assumptions. By late afternoon, 3 thick archive boxes rested across the polished conference table inside her private office, each containing records that had not been opened for years. Her assistant quietly left after placing the final box on the table, sensing that this assignment carried unusual personal importance. As the office door closed, Claire loosened a deep breath she had not realized she had been holding. One by one, she opened the faded folders. Annual reports, internal memoranda, insurance correspondence, newspaper articles. Most were exactly as she remembered. Then a yellowing local newspaper clipping slipped from between 2 files and landed softly on the table. The headline described a devastating winter highway accident involving one of Whitmore Industries' executive vehicles more than a decade earlier. Claire stared at the article without moving. She remembered that terrible day with painful clarity. At the time, she had been a young executive traveling with her father to an important business meeting when a violent snowstorm brought traffic to a standstill. Their driver lost control after another vehicle skidded across the icy highway. Emergency responders had struggled to reach the scene because of the weather. News reports had credited first responders for the rescue. The company had honored them publicly. The story had been closed, or so everyone believed. Claire reached deeper into the archive and discovered handwritten interview notes prepared during the company's internal review. Several witness statements had never appeared in the official report. One sentence immediately caught her attention. An unidentified civilian reached the vehicle before emergency services arrived and remained with the injured passengers until help arrived. Claire slowly reread the line. There was no name attached, only a brief description. She searched through additional documents until another note surfaced. Witness believes the civilian left the scene before authorities obtained identification. Claire frowned. She had never seen those pages before. Why had no one investigated further? Across town, Daniel finished preparing dinner inside the modest apartment he shared with Lily. Steam rose from a pot of homemade soup, while soft music played from an old radio near the kitchen window. Their home was small, but every shelf, photograph, and carefully repaired piece of furniture reflected warmth instead of hardship. Lily set the table while talking excitedly about school. "If you get the job," she said, Maybe we can finally replace the refrigerator that keeps making funny noises. Daniel laughed quietly. Only if this one decides it has completely retired. Lily smiled. I think it already has. For a few peaceful minutes, the outside world disappeared completely. Daniel never mentioned Whitmore Industries. He never wondered why the interview had felt different from every other job application. To him, tomorrow would simply be another ordinary day. Back inside the executive office, Claire continued searching through the files until she uncovered one final envelope marked confidential. Inside rested several photographs taken by investigators after the highway accident. Most showed damaged vehicles and snow-covered roads. Then she reached the final photograph. It captured a distant figure kneeling beside the passenger side of the executive sedan while wrapping a heavy winter coat around someone inside the vehicle. The image was blurred by falling snow, making the man's face almost impossible to recognize. Yet one detail stood out with startling clarity. The man wore the exact same silver wristwatch Claire had noticed on Daniel Brooks earlier that morning while he shook hands with the hiring manager. She remembered it because the worn leather strap looked decades old, carefully repaired instead of replaced. Claire slowly lowered the photograph beside Daniel's employment application. Her heartbeat quickened as two separate moments, 12 years apart, seemed to overlap. She whispered to herself, "It cannot be a coincidence." But even if the man in the photograph truly was Daniel Brooks, one question still refused to leave her mind. Why had the person who may have saved her life walked away without ever telling anyone who he was? Claire Whitmore had spent years believing every important question eventually found an answer. Business had taught her that every decision left a paper trail, every financial transaction created a record, and every promise could be verified with enough determination. Yet the deeper she searched into the past, the more she realized that the most meaningful moments in life were often the ones that left almost no evidence behind. Early the next morning, she arrived at headquarters before sunrise. The cleaning staff had only begun their work, and the executive floor remained unusually quiet. Waiting on her desk was another folder prepared overnight by the company's legal archives. This one contained interviews with emergency responders who had arrived at the highway accident 12 years earlier. Claire carefully read each statement until one brief paragraph caught her attention. A retired state trooper had written that an unidentified man ignored freezing temperatures while helping stabilize two injured passengers before rescue teams reached the scene. According to the report, the man repeatedly refused medical attention for himself and quietly disappeared before anyone could thank him. Claire leaned back in her chair, staring through the office windows as the city slowly awakened below. The description matched the mysterious witness statement she had found the previous evening. More importantly, it matched the quiet humility she had seen in Daniel Brooks during his interview. There was no trace of someone seeking recognition, only the quiet habit of helping others before thinking about himself. Determined to learn more, Claire asked Human Resources to discreetly verify Daniel's employment history. Within an hour, another report arrived. It showed years of steady work across schools, hospitals, warehouses, and community facilities. Every supervisor described him almost the same way: reliable, respectful, honest, never late, never seeking attention. One handwritten recommendation stood apart from the others. If every employee carried Daniel Brooks's integrity, leadership would become much easier. Claire read that sentence twice before gently closing the file. Meanwhile, Daniel began another ordinary morning. After walking Lily to school, he stopped at a neighborhood grocery store to purchase a few essentials before heading home. As he reached the checkout counter, an elderly woman accidentally dropped several bags, sending canned goods rolling across the floor. Without hesitation, Daniel knelt to gather every item before helping carry her groceries to her car. He declined the small amount of cash she offered in appreciation. "You have already thanked me," he said with a warm smile. "That is enough." Unaware that anyone had noticed, Daniel drove away while the grateful woman continued watching his truck disappear into traffic. Back at Whitmore Industries, Claire's chief of security entered her office carrying another document. "We located surveillance footage from yesterday," he explained. "There is nothing unusual, but I thought you might want to see it." Claire watched the recording without speaking. The screen showed Daniel entering the lobby with Lily. It captured him thanking the receptionist, smiling at other applicants, straightening Lily's jacket, and patiently waiting without a single complaint despite the long delay. There was no arrogance, no attempt to impress anyone, only quiet dignity. Then Claire noticed something she had missed before. Every few minutes, Daniel looked toward his daughter first before looking anywhere else. It was not habit. It was instinct. The kind of instinct developed by someone who had spent years putting another person's needs ahead of his own. Claire slowly paused the video on that single frame. She recognized the expression immediately because she had once seen the same calm determination through a snow-covered windshield many years earlier. Yet one mystery remained untouched. If Daniel Brooks truly was the man who had changed the course of her life, why had he chosen a lifetime of silence instead of accepting the gratitude that should have followed him? And perhaps even more importantly, what had happened in his own life after the day he quietly walked away from the accident without leaving behind anything except unanswered questions? The boardroom of Whitmore Industries had witnessed countless negotiations, mergers, and strategic decisions, but on that particular morning, the atmosphere felt different long before the meeting officially began. Executives quietly reviewed financial reports while members of the board exchanged routine greetings, unaware that Claire Whitmore's attention was fixed on something far more personal than quarterly earnings. She entered carrying a slim leather folder instead of the usual stack of financial projections. Those who knew her well immediately sensed the change. Claire rarely appeared distracted, yet today there was an unmistakable weight behind her calm expression. After opening the meeting with several routine business updates, she unexpectedly paused. "Before we continue," she said, "I would like to discuss a matter involving our company's history." The room grew silent. Several directors exchanged puzzled glances. Whitmore Industries had always celebrated its milestones, but revisiting the distant past during a board meeting was highly unusual. Claire placed an enlarged copy of the old highway accident photograph onto the conference table. "How many of you remember the winter accident involving my father and me 12 years ago?" Nearly every hand rose. Most remembered the event because it had nearly changed the future of the company. Claire nodded slowly. "We have always believed we knew exactly what happened that day." She looked around the room before continuing. "I am no longer convinced that is true." The directors leaned forward with growing curiosity. Claire carefully summarized the witness statements she had uncovered. The unidentified civilian who reached the vehicle before emergency responders, and the evidence suggesting that one unknown individual had remained at the scene despite dangerous weather conditions. She deliberately avoided making conclusions. Instead, she presented only verified facts. "Yesterday," she continued, "a man applied for a janitor position at this company. His name is Daniel Brooks." Several executives recognized the name immediately from the unusual rumors circulating through the building. Claire then placed Daniel's employment application beside the old photograph. "I cannot yet prove they are the same person," she admitted. "But I have found enough evidence to believe we owe him the opportunity to answer a question that has remained unresolved for 12 years. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, the company's oldest board member quietly broke the silence. "If your conclusion is correct," he said thoughtfully, "then the company has spent more than a decade thanking the wrong people while overlooking the individual who acted first." Claire lowered her eyes briefly before answering. "That possibility has kept me awake all night." Across town, Daniel received an unexpected telephone call while repairing a loose cabinet door inside his apartment. The caller identified herself as a representative from Human Resources at Whitmore Industries. "Mr. Brooks," she said politely, "the company would like to invite you back tomorrow morning for a brief follow-up conversation regarding your application." Daniel seemed mildly surprised, but not suspicious. "Of course," he replied warmly. "I would be happy to come." After ending the call, Lily looked up from the dining table where she was finishing her homework. "Was that about the job?" Daniel smiled. "It sounds like they have a few more questions." Lily's face brightened. "That is a good sign, isn't it?" He laughed softly. "Sometimes it is." Neither of them imagined that the invitation had little to do with janitorial duties anymore. Back inside the boardroom, the meeting had officially resumed, yet no one seemed interested in budgets or market forecasts. Every executive's thoughts had shifted toward the same quiet mystery. Claire carefully returned the photograph to its folder before closing the meeting with one final statement. "Tomorrow, I intend to speak with Daniel Brooks myself. Whether my suspicions prove correct or not, I believe every company should understand the character of the people who walk through its doors. And somehow, I cannot shake the feeling that this man has already changed the future of Whitmore Industries once before without asking for anything in return. Daniel Brooks arrived at Whitmore Industries the following morning wearing the same neatly pressed blue shirt he had worn for his original interview. Nothing about his appearance suggested he expected special treatment. He parked his aging pickup truck in the visitor lot, straightened the collar of his jacket, and smiled as Lily handed him a small folded piece of paper before leaving for school with a family friend. "Open it later," she said. "Only after your meeting." Daniel slipped the note into his shirt pocket without looking at it. "I promise." As he entered the lobby, several employees immediately recognized him. Word of the mysterious applicant had quietly spread throughout the building overnight. Conversations softened as he walked past. Some people glanced at him with curiosity. Others studied his face, trying to understand why the chief executive officer herself had requested a second meeting with a man applying to become a janitor. Daniel acknowledged each greeting with the same polite smile, completely unaware that he had become the center of attention. Upstairs, Claire Whitmore stood alone beside the large windows overlooking the city. She had spent most of the previous evening reviewing every archived document one final time. Although the evidence pointed toward one conclusion, she had decided that assumptions were no substitute for truth. She wanted to hear the story directly from the man himself. When her assistant announced Daniel's arrival, Claire took one steady breath before answering, "Please bring him in." A few moments later, Daniel entered the office with quiet confidence. He paused respectfully near the doorway. "Good morning, Ms. Whitmore." Claire looked at him carefully. In daylight and without the distractions of the previous day, she noticed details she had overlooked before. The calm expression, the gentle eyes, the repaired leather watchband. Above all, the quiet composure of someone who carried difficult memories without allowing them to define his character. She invited him to sit, but instead of discussing employment, she placed the faded accident photograph on the desk between them. Daniel's eyes drifted toward the picture. For the first time since entering the office, his expression changed almost imperceptibly. It was not fear. It was recognition. Claire noticed immediately. "Have you seen this photograph before?" she asked softly. Daniel remained silent for several seconds before answering honestly. "Yes." Claire felt her heartbeat quicken. "Were you there that day?" Daniel lowered his eyes briefly toward the old photograph. "I was driving home after finishing a maintenance shift several towns away. The snow had become so heavy that traffic nearly stopped. Then I saw the accident." Claire leaned forward without interrupting. Daniel continued quietly. "Several people stayed inside their vehicles because the road was dangerous. I understood why, but I also knew someone inside that car needed help immediately." His voice remained remarkably calm, as though describing an ordinary afternoon rather than the defining moment of another person's life. "I broke one of the windows after I realized the doors would not open. Your father was unconscious. You were trying to speak, but you could barely move." Claire felt tears gathering despite every attempt to remain composed. The memories she had struggled to recover suddenly became vivid. She remembered a reassuring voice telling her help was coming. She remembered someone placing a heavy coat over her shoulders to keep her warm. She remembered a pair of steady hands refusing to leave her alone. "Why did you leave?" Claire whispered. Daniel offered a gentle smile, filled with quiet humility. "Because emergency responders had arrived. They knew what to do better than I did." Claire shook her head slowly. "You never told anyone who you were." Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "The important part was that everyone survived. My name was never the important part." Silence settled across the office once again, but this time it carried a completely different meaning. Claire finally understood that the greatest debt her company had carried for 12 years was not financial. It was a debt of gratitude owed to a man who had never expected it to be repaid. The news traveled through Whitmore Industries with remarkable speed, but no official announcement had yet been made. Employees sensed that something extraordinary had happened behind the closed doors of the chief executive officer's office. The maintenance department had heard whispers. Human resources had become unusually quiet. Even senior executives seemed distracted as they walked through the hallways. Yet only two people knew the complete truth. Claire Whitmore stood alone in the executive conference room long before the afternoon gathering began. She had asked every department manager and board member to attend a brief company meeting without revealing the reason. Beside the podium rested a single framed photograph from 12 years earlier. It was the same faded image that had finally led her to Daniel Brooks. Across the room, Daniel waited near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable with the attention surrounding him. He had politely declined Claire's offer to sit in the front row. "I am only here because you invited me," he had quietly explained. "This day should belong to your company, not to me." Claire smiled gently. "Today," she answered, "our company exists because of people who believed in doing the right thing. That includes you." As employees gradually filled the room, conversations faded into silence. No one expected a routine corporate meeting to include a janitor applicant standing quietly beside the back wall. Some recognized Daniel immediately. Others looked confused, wondering why an applicant had been invited to an executive event. Claire stepped onto the stage and waited until every eye turned toward her. "For many years," she began calmly, "I believed that success was built through vision, discipline, and hard work. Those qualities remain important. But this week, I was reminded that the greatest foundations are often built by acts of kindness that no one ever sees." She lifted the framed photograph for everyone to view. 12 years ago, my father and I survived a devastating highway accident during a severe winter storm. For all these years, I believed I knew every person responsible for saving our lives. She paused before looking toward Daniel. "I was wrong." The room became completely silent. Claire carefully explained the investigation, the forgotten witness statements, and the evidence that had finally revealed the identity of the unidentified civilian who reached the vehicle before emergency responders. She never exaggerated the facts. She simply allowed the truth to speak for itself. Then she turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, would you please join me?" Daniel hesitated before slowly walking to the front of the room. Hundreds of eyes followed him, yet his expression remained exactly as it had during his interview. Calm, humble, and quietly respectful. Claire faced the audience once more. "This man never asked for recognition. He never contacted our family. He never accepted public praise. He simply helped complete strangers and continued living his life." She looked directly at Daniel before adding, "Because that was the kind of man he chose to be." A long moment of silence followed before someone near the back of the room began applauding. Another employee joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire conference room rose to its feet. The applause echoed through the building with a sincerity that no formal ceremony could have manufactured. Daniel looked visibly moved, though he lowered his eyes as if hoping the attention would quickly pass. When the applause finally softened, Claire reached into a folder and removed a formal employment letter. "Daniel Brooks," she said warmly, "your application for the janitor position has been approved." A few employees smiled, believing the announcement had ended. Claire continued, "However, that is only the beginning. Effective immediately, I am also appointing you as Community Values Advisor to the executive leadership team. Not because of what you accomplished 12 years ago, but because the character you have shown every day since then is exactly the kind of leadership this company needs." Daniel accepted the letter slowly, almost unable to speak. After a long pause, he simply smiled and quietly replied, "Thank you. I will do my very best." And in that single humble sentence, everyone present understood why true greatness had never depended on his job title. 6 months later, visitors entering Whitmore Industries often paused beneath a simple bronze plaque displayed near the main entrance. Unlike the company's awards, financial milestones, or photographs of impressive headquarters, this plaque carried only a short inscription. "Character is measured by what we choose to do when no one is watching." Every employee passed those words each morning, and over time, they became more than decoration. They became part of the culture. Daniel Brooks never asked for the plaque to be installed. In fact, he had quietly suggested that Claire remove any public reference to him. "People should come here to do good," he had told her. "Not because they hope someone notices." Claire had smiled. "That is exactly why your story belongs here." Daniel accepted his new responsibilities with the same humility that had defined every chapter of his life. Although he continued advising executive leadership on employee culture and community outreach, he frequently spent time alongside maintenance teams, cafeteria workers, reception staff, and warehouse employees. He believed leadership began by understanding the people whose work was often overlooked. It did not take long for employees to notice that his office door remained open to everyone. Whether someone needed advice, encouragement, or simply a patient listener, Daniel treated each conversation with equal respect. Titles never influenced the kindness he offered. Claire often watched these quiet moments from a distance. She had built one of the nation's most successful companies through discipline and determination. Yet Daniel reminded her every day that the strongest organizations were not held together by policies alone. They were strengthened by trust, compassion, and ordinary people choosing integrity when no reward was guaranteed. Inspired by Daniel's example, Whitmore Industries established a new annual recognition called the Quiet Courage Award. Unlike traditional corporate honors, employees could not nominate themselves. Instead, coworkers submitted stories about colleagues whose unnoticed acts of kindness had made a meaningful difference in someone else's life. During the first ceremony, Daniel insisted on sitting among the audience rather than joining executives on stage. As the winners shared stories of helping strangers, mentoring new employees, supporting families through difficult times, and serving their communities without seeking recognition, Daniel quietly realized that kindness had begun spreading far beyond one single act on a snowy highway years before. One evening after work, Daniel and Lily walked together through a neighborhood park painted in the warm colors of early autumn. Lily, now taller than she had been only months earlier, looked up at her father with thoughtful curiosity. "Dad," she asked, "why did you never tell me that you saved Ms. Whitmore?" Daniel smiled gently as fallen leaves drifted across the path. "Because that was never the most important part of the story." Lily tilted her head. "Then what was?" Daniel stopped walking for a moment and looked toward families laughing together beneath the golden trees. "The important part is that every person has the chance to make someone else's life better. Sometimes people remember your name. Sometimes they never learn it. Either way, doing the right thing is still the right thing." Lily quietly slipped her hand into his. "I hope I grow up to be like you." Daniel's eyes softened with quiet emotion. "No," he answered warmly. "I hope you grow up to become the very best version of yourself." Across the city skyline, the lights inside Whitmore Industries slowly illuminated the evening. Claire stood alone in her office, looking toward the entrance where employees continued leaving for home beneath the bronze plaque. She understood now that the greatest investment her company would ever make was not measured in profits, buildings, or market value. It would always be measured by the lives touched through simple acts of courage and kindness. And it had all begun with a single father who walked through the front door searching for honest work, never imagining that the greatest legacy he would leave behind had started long before anyone recognized his name.